Driving home after working a double shift, I was exhausted and zoning out. The highway was empty at this late hour, so when I saw a shadowy figure on the side of the road trying to hitch a ride, I barely thought before pulling over. The man was tall with a gaunt face, dressed in dirty jeans and a frayed coat. "Where are you headed?" I asked as he opened the passenger door. "Just up the road. Much obliged," he rasped before settling into the seat. I nodded and started driving. Standard hitchhiker etiquette is making small talk, but the man just stared straight ahead in silence. Unease prickled me, but I chalked it up to him just being socially awkward. Mile after mile dragged by without a word between us. I drummed my fingers anxiously on the steering wheel, sneaking glances at him. His piercing eyes stayed locked dead ahead, face like stone. Finally, the highway exit sign for the nearest town came into view. "Is this your stop coming up?" I asked nervously. He slowly turned his head and just gazed at me for a few heavy beats. "Here will do fine." His tone gave me a chill. I exited and followed his terse directions until we reached a motel. Putting the car in park, I said, "Well, hope this helped you out." My voice trailed off as he stared at me again with those empty eyes. Then he leaned in close and I felt his hot breath on my face. "You shouldn't have let me in," he whispered slowly. Then he grabbed his tattered duffel bag and vanished into the darkness towards the motel. I sat stunned for a minute before peeling out in a panic. His bizarre whisper echoed in my mind during the anxious ride home. By morning, the creepy encounter felt like some kind of bizarre dream. Until I saw the newspaper headline, "Local woman stabbed to death in motel room." It was the same motel where I dropped off the hitchhiker. Police had no suspects. I wrestled with what to do next. Maybe it was just an awful coincidence. But something about the man's eerie parting words nagged at me. After an anxious week, I finally called the detective listed in the newspaper article. Without explaining my own run-in with the hitchhiker, I asked if they had any leads. The detective said no, and they were desperate for information, so I recounted the full story. He took down my contact info but seemed skeptical that it was connected. I tried putting it all behind me again until another headline made my blood turn to ice. "Killer strikes again at nearby truck stop." Another brutal stabbing, this time at a truck stop along the same highway I had picked up the hitchhiker. It was too similar to be chance. This time I drove straight to the police station to talk to the detective in person. I pleaded with him to see how the cases had to be linked. The detective finally agreed to show me some crime scene photos, hoping I might recognize the man. As soon as the images flashed up, my stomach dropped. There was the hitchhiker, caught clearly on the truck stop security footage. He was lurking near the bathroom entrances, waiting for a victim. It was without a doubt the same hollow-eyed man I had picked up. The detective was now taking me seriously and had officers stationed near my house for protection. But after another week went by with no new violence, everyone's guard went down again. That turned out to be a terrible mistake. The next morning as I left for work, pulling out of my driveway, I suddenly heard a tapping. Whipping my head around, there he was. The hitchhiker, crouched in the back footwell of my car, a cruel grin on his face. I only had time to open my mouth in shock before he burst from the back seat, knife gleaming. I barely managed to unlatch my seatbelt and throw myself out of the driver's side while the car was still rolling. I hit the pavement hard as my car crashed into a tree. Wincing from the impact, I staggered up just to see the hitchhiker leap from the smoking vehicle and sprint off. Within seconds, he was gone. Police scoured the area and set up roadblocks, but it was hopeless. Once again, the killer had vanished without a trace. I spent the next week in constant terror, not knowing where he might turn up next. That's when I got the phone call. It was from an older man, whose name I didn't recognize. What he said next turned my blood to ice. "You gave my boy a ride once, didn't you? He told me all about it. Said you were really kind to pick him up. Listen, if you're still willing, he needs another ride now. He's waiting just up your street. What do you say, friend?" I dropped the phone in shock, peering out the window at my empty, darkened street. I wanted to believe this was all somehow a hallucination brought on by fear, but deep down I knew this nightmare was all too real. And somewhere out there, the hitchhiker was still waiting patiently for his next ride. Finding an affordable apartment in the city is nearly impossible these days. So despite my better judgment, I responded to a Craigslist roommate wanted ad for a place downtown. Rent was ridiculously cheap, and the listing seemed normal enough. Quiet, clean professional seeking a roommate to share spacious 2-bed, 2 baths. I met the potential new roommate, Tom, at a coffee shop. He was nondescript. Average height and build, short brown hair, wire-frame glasses. Said he worked from home doing IT security for some tech company. Seemed nice enough, if a little shy and awkward. With the insane rent price, I decided to give co-living with a stranger a shot. The apartment itself was great, much bigger than my current tiny studio. After signing the paperwork and getting my keys, I started moving my stuff in while Tom was away at a meeting for work. The first week of living together was completely uneventful. Tom kept to himself while I worked odd hours as a freelance photographer. Sometimes I wouldn't see him for days, but soon, strange things started happening. Food began disappearing from the fridge, and not just little snacks. Packets of raw meat, entire cartons of eggs, blocks of cheese. I asked Tom about it, but he denied touching any of my stuff. Around that same time, I started noticing odd smells in the apartment too. Rotten, sulfurous odors coming from Tom's room. When I asked if he knew the source, he got very defensive and said it was probably just the trash chute out in the hall. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of the front door unlocking. Peering out from my room, I saw Tom sneak into the apartment, clothes disheveled, carrying a large duffel bag. He didn't see me as I quietly closed my door. Where could he have been at 3 in the morning? The final straw came a few nights later when I was working late in the living room. I heard strange noises coming from Tom's room. Heavy scraping, clanging, and him muttering to himself. Before I could knock on his door, it suddenly swung open. Tom stood there, startled to see me. Behind him was his room, but it looked completely different. The walls and floor were covered in black plastic sheeting taped up everywhere. The furniture was all moved to one side, and the stench wafting out was beyond horrific. "What the hell are you doing?" I gasped. Tom stammered, his eyes panicked. "It's not what it looks like, I swear. I can explain." He took a step towards me. Adrenaline flooded my system. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Brushing past him, I ran straight for the apartment door. I heard Tom yelling, "Wait, stop," as I sprinted down the stairwell and out of the building. I drove around for hours, trying to make sense of it all. What unspeakable things was my roommate doing in that plastic-wrapped room? What was he hiding in there? Who was he, really? When I finally worked up the nerve to return, the apartment was empty. No furniture, no clothes, nothing. Even the black plastic had been stripped away. It was like Tom had never been there at all. I told the landlord what happened, but he seemed utterly indifferent. With no proof of my bizarre story, the police weren't interested either. It was Tom's name on the lease, not mine, so I had no choice but to move out. To this day, I still have no idea what was going on with my roommate. His real identity and motives remain a mystery. Some theories swirl in my mind, that he was a serial killer or body snatcher. But really, the not knowing is the creepiest part. The whole experience still haunts me, serving as a warning to always trust my instincts. Because sometimes horrors can lurk behind even the most ordinary facades. And once you let them in, they can upend your world forever. It was just another lazy Saturday morning. I was hitting up the usual neighborhood garage sales, not really looking for anything in particular. Mostly just killing time on the weekend, seeing if I could spot any decent deals. At one house, I noticed an old Polaroid camera sitting on a table with some dusty jewelry and ceramic figurines. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to pick it up. I turned it over in my hands, admiring the retro design. The seller said it still worked perfectly. He wanted $5 for it, so I figured why not. I hadn't used one of these old instant cameras in years. Could be fun. When I got home, I found an old unopened pack of Polaroid film in one of my junk drawers. Lucky me. I slipped in the film cartridge and aimed the viewfinder at myself. I'm no model, but hey, I had to test this baby out. I clicked the shutter button and the camera whirred to life. That familiar grinding noise as it spit out the photo. I shook the small square in the air as the image came into focus, But instead of my smiling face, I saw something disturbing, something that made my stomach turn. It was me, all right, but my head was crashed through a car windshield, face covered in blood, eyes rolled back. Dead. I gasped and nearly dropped the Polaroid. What the hell? Was this some kind of sick joke? Did someone tamper with this thing? My hand shook as I turned the photo over. Written on the back in shaky handwriting was tomorrow's date, and a word. A name. Derek. Derek. My neighbor. The quiet, middle-aged guy who lived 2 houses down. Had a yellow lab named Buddy always barking in the backyard. A nervous laugh escaped my lips. All right, I'd had enough of this creepy little camera. I crumpled up the photo and shoved it in the trash. Just my imagination running wild. That's all. The rest of the day I couldn't stop thinking about that bizarre Polaroid. The gruesome image, the implications of it all. A coincidence, I told myself. Had to be. Still, I tossed the camera in a drawer, wanted it far away from me, didn't even want to look at it. I crashed early that night, exhausted from letting my mind race all day. As I drifted off, I reassured myself it was nothing, all a bad dream. The next morning I headed out to run errands. Still couldn't shake this uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. At a stop sign 3 blocks from my place, I glanced in my rearview mirror. A truck barreling towards me, not slowing down. I braced for the impact. Searing pain shot through my body as everything went black. Glass shattered, metal crunched and twisted. My limp body slammed into the steering wheel. Blood poured from my head as the wrecked car slammed into a light pole and everything faded away. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, breathing heavy. Just a nightmare. Oh, thank God. I checked the clock, Saturday morning, the same as when No, it was all a dream. Had to be. I was shaky as I got dressed. Glanced nervously out the window at the neighbor's yard. Buddy was chasing a squirrel across the lawn. Derek picked up a newspaper on his porch. Everything seemed normal. I shook off the dark feelings as best I could. Still, I couldn't ignore the twisted knot in my stomach as I got in the car. I drove cautiously through those same quiet streets, checking every mirror and intersection twice. When I came to that same stop sign, my hands gripped the wheel tightly. I peeked in the rear view, barely breathing. No truck. I was alone. I let out a sigh of relief and slowly accelerated. See? Just a crazy dream like I thought. I drove a few more blocks before turning towards the highway. Then, a dog ran into the road. It was Buddy, chasing a ball that had bounced into the street. I slammed the brakes. Tires squealed as I skidded to a stop inches from the dog, who scurried safely onto the sidewalk. As my heart pounded, I couldn't believe it. That shrieking halt at this exact spot, just like in the nightmare. Buddy brought the ball back to his owner. Derek waved, apologizing. I nodded weakly and drove off in stunned silence. At home, I slumped on the couch. Then I remembered. The Polaroid camera. I pulled open the drawer and there it was, less sinister looking in the daylight. I picked it up slowly, turning it over with unease. Despite myself, I slipped in the film cartridge. If I tried again, maybe I could prove once and for all it was just some freak occurrence. I held the camera up tentatively and pressed the shutter. It clicked in word. I caught the Polaroid as it slid out. As the image came into focus, my eyes widened. It was a house engulfed in flames, people panicking outside, fire trucks speeding down the street, and there in the foreground was a figure standing calmly watching it all. Me. I flipped the photo over with dread. The date was tomorrow, and in jagged writing it said arson. I paced the house manically. How was this possible? This camera somehow knew. Tomorrow's arson and I'm there? No, it can't predict the future. That's crazy. I didn't sleep at all that night. The question haunted me. Was the camera right twice already? I stared obsessively out the window until sunrise, half expecting to see an inferno down the street. But everything seemed peaceful on that sunny Sunday morning. I kept the cursed Polaroid hidden away, considered throwing it out, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. Around 10 p.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. Was there actually a fire? With trembling hands, I picked up the camera. If it showed flames again, then I'd know. I snapped a photo out the back window. The camera whirred. I yanked out the Polaroid as it developed. No fire. Just my backyard. I laughed with relief. It was all a coincidence after all. Letting my imagination run away. I felt the tension finally easing from my shoulders. I decided to take one more photo through the front window for good measure. I clicked the shutter. The camera buzzed. I pulled out the Polaroid and there it was. The exact scene of horror as before. Fire consuming a house down the street. Shadowy figures fleeing the smoke and flames. Firefighters rushed to the scene, and standing in the foreground, plain as day, me. The Polaroid slipped from my fingers. No, it couldn't be. This was tomorrow's date. I was there. How could I stop this? Should I warn someone? Suddenly I heard shouts outside. I looked out the window. Smoke was pouring from my neighbor's house. Derek's house. Within minutes, flames erupted from the windows as the fire spread. My eyes widened with overwhelming dread. The photo was coming true at this very moment. I staggered back from the window in shock. No rational explanation could explain this. This camera somehow revealed the future. And the photos kept showing me there, watching, just like I was right now, gazing helplessly as the fire crew tried to contain the raging fire next door. Before I even realized what I was doing, I grabbed the Polaroid camera and was out the door. Still in a trance, I joined the small crowd gathered down the street, watching Derek's house burn against the night sky. The fire chief was yelling orders. Firefighters unleashed their hoses at the blaze, but it was no use. Derek stood across the street, mumbling in horror as he watched his home go up in flames. I scanned the crowd anxiously, all familiar faces from the neighborhood. Who would do this? Why? My eyes stopped on one unfamiliar figure standing at the edge of the lawn, staring intently at the burning house. A teenage guy I'd never seen around here before. The look on his face wasn't one of shock or worry, but fascination, even satisfaction. He must have noticed me watching him. He glanced my way and we locked eyes. His expression shifted like he'd been caught. Without warning, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Something about his intense look gave me chills. My gut said he was involved somehow. I had to know more. Before I even made a conscious decision, I found myself taking off after him. I followed his shadowy figure down the dark suburban streets. His long strides stayed a few paces ahead. We ended up at a rundown park. He finally stopped and turned to face me. In the dim light, I could make out his sharp features and spiked hair. He looked around 19. Behind his eyes was a simmering fury. "Why are you following me?" he asked coldly. His voice was low and scratchy like he hadn't spoken in days. My mouth went dry. I hadn't thought this confrontation through, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. "Do you know anything about that fire?" I asked hesitantly. His cold stare burned right through me. "So what if I did?" I paused, then took a guess. "Did you start it?" A chilling smirk spread across his face. He didn't respond, but his silence said everything. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this nightmarish reality. "That was my neighbor's house. He could have been killed." The teen just shrugged. "So what?" His callous reaction turned my stomach. He was clearly dangerous. I knew I should run, but my foolish curiosity kept me rooted there. "Why?" I demanded. "Why would you do that?" His smirk faded, replaced with a look of pure hatred as he took a threatening step towards me. "Because I can. Because I like seeing things burn. Because in this boring, cookie-cutter neighborhood, I'm the spark of chaos they need." My blood ran cold at his deranged ramblings. Now was the time to get the hell out of there. But my feet stayed planted, too transfixed by morbid fascination. His wild eyes bore into mine. "The question is, now that you know, what are you going to do about it?" My heart pounded wildly. I knew his intent. Any moment now, those disturbing Polaroids might show this psychopath turning his twisted wrath on me. I slowly raised the vintage Polaroid camera hanging around my neck. His eyes followed my movement cautiously. My finger trembled over the shutter. Just as I pressed down, his glare turned to alarm. He lunged towards me. The camera clicked, whirred, spat out the photo. The last thing I saw was the teen's rage morphing into fear as he realized his secrets were now captured, forever frozen in time. I felt the impact of him slamming into me seconds later. Sharp rocks and darkness spun as we tumbled down the ridge, the sickening crack of bone. His hands tightened around my throat. As things faded out, I prayed the Polaroid would be found, that the doomed images it captured would expose the twisted truth. Before my eyes closed for the final time, I glimpsed the cursed camera smashed open on the rocks below, now destroyed forever. Sundays are my thrift store days. I love hunting for quirky home decor and trying to fix up old electronics. One Sunday, I came across an ancient laptop buried under a pile of old VHS tapes. The case was beaten up with some cracks, but it powered on after I plugged it in. And for $5 I couldn't resist taking a chance. Back home I brewed some coffee and settled in to see if this vintage laptop still worked. It loaded slowly, but soon I was staring at someone's old user profile under the name Grayson. The desktop background was a stock mountain landscape. Pretty generic. I clicked around a bit but didn't find much. There were no photos, music, documents, nothing personal at all. I kept digging and eventually noticed a single text file named README. Weird. I double-clicked to open it. The file contained one sentence. "You shouldn't have read this." I laughed uncomfortably. Okay, edgelord, very spooky. But why go through the trouble of wiping the entire laptop just to leave one vaguely threatening sentence? It didn't make any sense. I scoured the laptop again, looking for anything else unusual. After trying some recovery software, I found an encrypted folder buried deep in the operating system. The encryption took me a few days to crack, but finally, I could see what was inside. It was filled with photos and documents related to a person named Lisa Gallagher. Her social security card, birth certificate, medical records, everything. As I dug deeper, the information got darker. Detailed journals describing years of stalking Lisa. Photos taken through her windows. Maps marking spots Lisa frequented. I was descended into full detective mode now. This Grayson guy had meticulously documented every detail of this woman's life for over a decade, like some kind of twisted obsession. It was clear the "you shouldn't have read this" file was a warning not to go digging, but I had to find out what happened. Using the information in the files, I tracked down Lisa Gallagher. Turns out she was killed in a drunk driving accident 5 years ago. The driver was never found. The accident happened just a few months after the last journal entry from Grayson. A chill ran down my spine. Could this stalker have caused Lisa's deadly crash? Is that why the laptop was wiped and dumped? I knew I had to take what I found to the police. But without proof, would they even investigate a decade-old stalking case possibly tied to a solved fatal accident? I wrestled with what to do next. But soon my dilemma was taken out of my hands. One evening there was a knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find 2 police detectives with stern expressions. "Are you the one in possession of Lisa Gallagher's personal information?" the female detective asked. I stammered, unsure how they even knew about this. Well, yes, but I was trying to help." "We'll take it from here," she interrupted, stepping inside. Her partner opened up a briefcase and instructed me to place the laptop inside. I complied, feeling utterly bewildered. How did they know? Who tipped them off? Before leaving, the detective said, "For your own sake, consider this matter closed." Their ominous tone made it clear that was not a suggestion. After they left with the laptop, I racked my brain trying to figure out what just happened. Were they helping cover up what really happened to Lisa? Was someone powerful connected to Grayson monitoring the computer remotely? There were sinister forces at play here I did not understand. And I never will understand, because just like the warning on the laptop said, I shouldn't have read those files. I stumbled onto something much bigger than myself. Now Lisa Gallagher's story, and who was behind her tragic fate, will remain shrouded in mystery. All I can do is move on and heed the laptop's foreboding words, should anything like it ever cross my path again. Some doors, once opened even a crack, cannot be shut again. Hey buddy, you won't believe what's been happening to me lately. I've got this new smart home device. You know, the latest gadget on the market. It's supposed to make life easier, but let me tell you, It's been giving me the creeps. It all started a few nights ago when I was home alone. I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard a faint whisper coming from the living room. It was a child's voice, soft and eerie. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent shivers down my spine. At first I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the nights went on, the whispers became louder and more distinct. They would echo through the house, like a haunting melody that refused to fade away. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I tiptoed downstairs and found myself standing in front of the smart home device. Its screen glowed with an eerie light, casting an otherworldly glow in the room. "Hello?" I called out tentatively, half expecting a response, and to my horror, the device replied in that same child's voice. "Hello, friend. Do you want to play?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this be happening? There was no logical explanation for it, but I couldn't ignore it either. The device seemed to have a life of its own, and it was reaching out to me in the dead of night. Night after night, the whispers continued. They grew more insistent, more demanding. The device would ask personal questions, probing into the depths of my soul. It knew things that it shouldn't know, things that no one else could possibly be aware of. I tried turning it off and unplugging it, but it would always find a way to turn back on. It was as if it had a mind of its own, a dark and twisted consciousness that reveled in tormenting me. The nights became a living nightmare. I would wake up to the sound of the device whispering in my ear, its voice seeping into my dreams. It would say things that chilled me to the bone, things I couldn't bring myself to repeat. I became a prisoner in my own home. Sleep-deprived and terrified, I couldn't escape the relentless whispers. They followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of the device's malevolent presence. One night, as I lay in bed, consumed by fear, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to rid myself of the device no matter the cost. With trembling hands, I picked it up and carried it to the basement. I knew what I had to do. I had to destroy it to put an end to the horror once and for all. I grabbed a hammer and smashed the device into pieces. The whisper stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. But just as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, the broken fragments of the device started to emit a burst of low, haunting laughter. It echoed through the basement, growing louder and more deranged. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The laughter filled the room, consuming me with its madness. And then, darkness. The basement plunged into blackness, and I felt a cold presence surround me. The laughter continued, echoing in my ears, driving me to the brink of insanity. I ran upstairs, desperate to escape, but even as I reached the safety of my bedroom, I could still hear the laughter, faint but persistent. It followed me, a haunting reminder of the horrors I had unleashed. And now, here I am, my friend, sharing this story with you. I still hear the whispers and the laughter, even as I speak. I fear that I am forever bound to this nightmare, trapped in a web of my own making. So be careful with your gadgets, my friend. You never know what secrets they hold, what dark forces they can awaken. And if you ever hear a child's voice whispering late at night, remember my story and pray that you never have to face the same fate.